Hello everyone, I'm Neurobandit, formerly known as the Ladies' Man Nathan, and I've been playing After the Flash games for about 8 years now. I've been around since Rain, and have been active since the start of Mirage in the community. Honestly, Wintertide is mediocre and disappointing. It's completely lost the charm of the franchise, and it has an identity crisis. I don't know what type of game the chat is trying to spin 8 as, but it's definitely not the creative, apocalyptic survival roleplay game that I grew up with. I've quit the genre for nearly a year now, but I want to make this video to document my time in the franchise, if for no other reason than to reflect on where Chad went wrong and where he went right. This is probably going to take a while, and for some parts I'm just going to be going through my memories, so for those of you who don't care for that, I've made chapters for you to jump to whatever you're interested in. My first After the Flash game is Rain. I was around 10 years old at the time and I had no clue what I was doing, but that didn't matter. You see, the beauty of Rain was that everyone was just kids running around fail role-playing. I don't know what mature players did from that time, but I know that the organization of factions and events in general was very loose. Skype was used before Discord, and from what I hear, that didn't go well due to disorganization as well as griefing. But if there's any ancient old heads out there who want to correct me on that, please do. During roleplays, I typed so slowly that people would just walk away from me, causing me to start roleplays by apologizing that I typed slow, and to please wait. Vote trick abuse was rampant, and I recall a hacker attack or two where they killed the server with gears. Sandstorm, which I also briefly played, was much the same. Despite its state of anarchy, Rain sparked something within my clueless grade school self. It started my passion for roleplay games, and it led me to become the best and fastest typist in my class. I'd eventually move on from Rain, wandering from roleplay game to roleplay game. A couple years later, I would briefly rediscover the franchise, halfway through the life of Deep Sits and Deep Winter. I mostly just trolled on those games, purposefully FRPing to get reactions out of people. When I did try to roleplay, I was ridiculed by players who nitpicked my every action. They said stuff like, "Vests aren't allowed in Southside," to justify CRPing me into oblivion. That type of treatment deterred me from further attempts at roleplay, and I once again left the genre. It would only be by coincidence that I would stumble upon Mirage. I had no idea that my friend group at that time was into roleplay games, but one day I saw them on my homepage playing Mirage. It was in the November of 2018, and we were hunting for crates that were already removed from the game. I quickly learned the lore of the game and formed a little gang with my friends at the time. I learned how to CRP and became one of the many robbers within Boulder Cove. I'd eventually look to the factions within the game, settling on the CDF. I joined the faction in early 2019. I think that era was the most fun I had playing ATF ever. There was something about the characters within it, the tenseness between us and the USCPF sharing the space in Goldfield, and the story arcs that made it a special time for me. Like any faction, there were bad moments in the CDF, but for the most part, it was a lot of fun. I liked Mirage, which seems to be an unpopular opinion when you look at all the hate it's getting within the community. I want to state that I stopped playing it right before 2020 hit, so my only experience within it was of 2018 and 2019. It had the atmosphere of a true apocalyptic wasteland. Boulder Cove was dangerous. If you went into that city, even if you just wanted to do a quick stab run, you were going to be assaulted, whether it be by a bandit or mutant. Less popular locations, like the roadside bar, had a whole different vibe about them. Still dangerous and unprotected, but away from the hellscape of the pre-war ruins. Friends were made through chance encounters in RP. The customization system was revolutionary for the franchise. Playing outside of a faction was a viable and fun option. Within CDF, there was a lot of cool people across all ranks, making the faction approachable and fun. Faction roleplay created a great learning environment for young players. I myself made a lot of mistakes, including, Anyway, one could learn from their mistakes and become a better and more mature RPer as a result. Of course, Mirage did have its problems. Craterview was a population hub, which was annoying for those looking to roleplay elsewhere. I remember entire servers packed into that place. Inner circles across all factions prevented abusive people from being removed from their positions of power. Faction skirmishes were highly contested and often voided, becoming hotspots of arguments. Cross-faction story arcs were unstable and prone to abandonment, most notably the second campaign. LPMs were hit or miss when it came to moderation. I myself was falsely banned by Leonide, and I had to rescind my repeal 4 times before finally getting acknowledged and having it filed by one. Shout out to Smithington. A large controversy regarding Mirage was the toxic CRP environment. Honestly, if I had the option to pick between the Mirage community and the Wintertide community, I'd pick Mirage, but that's for later. Much like how I was deterred from playing Deep Sits, the CRP environment repelled softer people from the franchise, which left a lot of edgelords within the community. Say what you want, but honestly I think those types of people added to the gritty atmosphere of the game. I prefer it to Wintertide servers, which are filled with child role players that spend their entire time within Bargetown. The toxicity of the community back then is exaggerated nowadays, because the only players talking about Mirage now are the easily upset ones who still hold a grudge on random CRPers from back then. Most of the bad about Mirage came from abusive people in positions of power. If you got RA'd or if a firefight turned into an argument, you could just avoid the guy and walk away. Those encounters were meaningless. It was a whole different rodeo when you were being picked on by an LPM or faction HR. There wasn't much you could do since they were all friends with one another. Obviously, this wasn't just a Mirage problem. This has been an issue across the franchise, including Wintertide. By the time Overcast came about, I was deeply invested in ATF, which was honestly a pretty big mistake that I want to advise everyone listening against. Since Mirage, I really only interacted with the ATF community, which eventually led to an urge to leave, only for me to stay, because I had nowhere else to go. My piece of advice is to diversify the game communities you're in, because it's gonna get unfun as soon as you get jaded. I remember looking at a ATF Old Heads Roblox bio years ago, which said something like, "When you listen to the people who leave ATF, you realize they give all the same reasons, and your eyes are open to the same problems they left for." Anyway, let's talk about Overcast. Overcast was a cool concept. Despite being based on the Mirage map, it had different locations and threw out a good chunk of the established hierarchy within the factions of Mirage and replaced them with new players. They introduced new, interesting factions into the mix, and also brought back classic factions that hadn't seen much love in Mirage, notably ACMF. What was great about Overcast was that there wasn't a need to join a faction to feel involved. I started a hardcore RP game with my friends and we had a great time together. It was a very character-focused game which made you, as the individual, feel as though you had importance. Quests and reputation points were first introduced in Overcast as well, which were cool additions. Quests were usually a great deal of fun, but were prone to logistical and management issues, which brings us to the cons of Overcast. The biggest problem were cryptids. Restricted to LPMs, cryptids were invincible, superhuman creatures. They were not cool, they were not scary, they did not add to the atmosphere. Cryptids were a narcissistic creation which moderators abused to disrupt roleplay by maiming and sometimes even killing characters. I cannot state this any clearer. You were unable to fight back. If you tried, then firstly, you would do fuck all, since they're all bulletproof, and secondly, the moderator controlling it would usually get mad and either maim or kill your character. If you were being charged by a cryptid and you evaded them enough times, you'd be OOC'ly stopped and accused of power playing, which is incredibly ironic when it's coming from someone controlling a creature, which is the literal walking definition of god modding. If you successfully ran from one, you did a private message saying your character was too tired to run further, after which the LPM scripted would rush you out of nowhere. The problem was not that you couldn't win against one, it's that you couldn't fight back, nor escape. LPMs would try to brush off their cryptid's invincibility by claiming there was a secret private lore doc and it contained a hidden weakness. If that sounds like bullshit to you, that's because it is. These weaknesses were never explored, nor released to the public, and cryptids continued to be indestructible. I recall Canadian scripted ripping the arm off of my buddy in a single action because we shot at him when he approached us. As I carried him off to safety, he had to go AFK, upon which I went into OC mode and advised him to do the same. Another LPM, Derpy, saw this and tried to gaslight me into saying that I was OOC shielding. That was a particularly bad cryptid experience, but I encountered them a couple other times and they all went pretty much the same. Cryptids wouldn't be so bad if they were reserved for only special events such as quests, and also if a faction representative wanted to have one as part of their host, but the problem was that they would just wander around disrupting regular roleplay. Apart from that, the other big problem with Overcast was that it didn't feel like an apocalypse. Overcast felt more like country RP than anything else. There were no conventional mutants, and Boulder Cove was rarely populated. There was no famine, no drought, no scorching heat, no constant environmental threats which we endured in Mirage. Everyone was at the farm, and this non-gritty, non-apocalyptic environment gave rise to child RPers and other out-of-place characters, which killed the already jarring atmosphere of the game. The introduction of the Red Serpents was a spectacular failure. The storytellers of Overcast used them to relive the success of the Coyotes from Mirage, but were too lazy to incorporate anything new, causing organizers and players alike to lose interest in the faction. Frequent crashing led Overcast to earn the nickname Overcrash. Overall a decent game, Overcast would be killed with little notice with the premature, utterly failed release of Wintertide. Which brings us to ATF 8. I should preface this by saying that I quit Wintertide in March of this year, but from what I hear, the story has only recently started to pick up. It's hilarious to me that it's taken 2 years since release for the story to get anywhere, but this was predictable and should have been expected given the horrendous launch of the game. When ATF 8 released, it was a buggy, incomplete, unplayable mess, in a new, jarring timeline with equally terrible lore. There weren't even any guns in the game. Sunrise City had only 2 buildings with accessible interiors. Some factions didn't even have locations, and wouldn't for many months. Mutant guidelines were whipped up 5 minutes ahead of release, were unclear, and weren't thought out whatsoever. While revolutionary, the rig system was glitchy, hard to understand, and there would be saving errors, meaning that potentially hours of work building rigs would be wasted. There was no story. Perhaps worst of all was the atmosphere. Oh man, I thought Overcast didn't feel like an apocalypse, but Wintertide was on a whole other level. The new timeline and setting killed any semblance of the post-nuclear war apocalypse vibe that previous titles held. Chad blatantly shoehorned his political ideology into the lore, grossly simplifying the lore in a way that would appeal to him, at the cost of shattering any sense of realism or immersion. I'm convinced that he either refused to have his lore proofread, or he just ignored any criticism from editors. The factions were unoriginal, lazily written, and brought nothing new in terms of gameplay to the table. There's a reason why people say that Coalition is a copy of the NCR and the Alumni is a copy of the Brotherhood of Steel. Finally, Chad tried to replace the iconic ATF radio with some random-ass wind music at the start of Wintertide. Chad, bro, the Rain and Mirage soundtrack is carrying your game in terms of atmosphere. What are you thinking? Chad also tried to do this with the release of Mirage as well, and succeeded with Overcast. Weird how he tried to get rid of the old soundtrack for 3 games in a row. Well, 2.5. So, the launch was terrible, and one may feel inclined to ask why. Why did Chad release Wintertide in such a shit state? Because of money. To be more specific, the Christmas boxes. Christmas was approaching fast, and Overcast was still performing pretty well. Wintertide would need at least another year before being in a somewhat enjoyable state to play. So, what do you think Chad did? That's right, he gave the Overcast factions and storytellers essentially no advance notice, and released ATF 8 along with the Christmas boxes. This would instantly kill Overcast and leave the community with a shitty shell of an ATF game, which wouldn't significantly improve for well over a year. This was about the worst way Chad could have possibly released Wintertide and collect on the mystery box paycheck. He should have simply just released the Christmas boxes without releasing Wintertide, explaining to the community that it wasn't in a playable state and that he needed more time. This would keep Overcast active with an ongoing story, and would also raise the funds he wanted so badly. If he did it this way, I still would have bought the boxes, and so would most of the other people who bought the boxes when Wintertide released. I would understand, I would have understood, and I would have appreciated his honesty, and the fact that he let Overcast continue to survive. The premature release of Wintertide would be a near-fatal mistake for the game. With the launch out of the way, it's time to address the current problems with Wintertide. Of course, the setting hasn't gotten any better, the atmosphere is jarringly unimmersive, and the lore still sucks. The cryptid problem from Overcast has remanifested itself and rebranded it into Wintertide as Stage 2 Eldritches. But I'll stop myself from complaining about the physical state of the game and address some of the problems I see with the player base, both the community and community leaders. A huge issue I see is ass-kissing. Much of the recognizable names within the community have sucked dick and squeezed into inner circles to reach their positions. These types of people are blatant with their power-hungry attitude. Most of the time they rarely interact with the average player, and instead desperately shove themselves in the face of someone in a higher position than them in an attempt to rise the ranks themselves. The biggest problem with this is that it leaves competent, responsible, and mature players overlooked when it comes time for LPM picks and promotion pools. These ass-kissers lack accountability and often have a big ego, leading to abuse of power, which I touched upon in my Mirage segment. Praising Chad and other known figures is a common occurrence within these particular power-hungry players. Particular power-hungry players, particular power-hungry players, particular power-hungry players. Try saying that 5 times fast. Anyway, this type of ass-kissing mentality has also bled into the general Flashstorm population. Even unknown people with no prospects of rising the ranks of a faction will defend Chad due to delusions about Wintertide and not knowing any better. Often these people haven't played any other ATF title or only played Mirage for a few months before moving to Wintertide. This is a frustratingly annoying thing because it dissuades actual, constructively critical conversation from taking place, leaving these problems undiscussed and unchecked. The community has also adopted this very passive-aggressive attitude towards each other. In Mirage, if you piss someone off, you would be called retarded, no beating around the bush. I'm pretty sure you can't even say the word retard in Flash Storm anymore. The point is, you would know right away why the guy was mad. But in Wintertide, instead of being directly confrontational, community members, even moderators, will shit-talk others behind their back, or right in front of them, but without directly addressing them. This behavior is cringe, petty, and doesn't effectively address the reason that two parties are mad at each other in the first place. Let me give you an example. I was part of an IRMRS skirmish and had got shot at near the head, so I roleplayed it as a graze to the skull, because I hadn't got shot yet, and I sure wasn't about to RP my first gunshot wound as a kill shot. I did a moderator message afterwards saying that I should be at least critically injured, and that I wasn't roleplaying hits correctly. When the skirmish is over, the moderator is talking to another player next to me, and brings me up right in front of me regarding the controversy. As after mentioned, this attitude is petty, doesn't accomplish anything, and only lowers the other person's respect for you. Instead of doing this passive-aggressive dance around the issue, players need to be direct with each other regarding arguments, instead of this bait behavior. This shit is especially pathetic when it comes from a moderator. It's worth pointing out that these types of people are also the ones mini-modding over the slightest infractions. Finally, Wintertide has also seen an increase of child RPers and other quote-unquote non-combatant characters. Now, when I say quote-unquote non-combatant, I'm referring to de facto pacifist, cutesy characters that are good at home ec and not much else. These people take away from the atmosphere and are honestly just annoying. A child character can be done right, but people go about it in the most non-ATF, non-wasteland way possible. I'm also not saying that every character has to be a grizzled warrior. Characters who largely fill civilian roles and avoid confrontation are completely fine and are an essential part of the game. But child players and similar characters are at an entirely different level of atmosphere-breaking self-importance. Hilariously, the people with the worst cases of main character syndrome aren't those with bounties, aren't faction leaders, aren't event characters, but are child roleplayers. Well, there's also that one depressed Voyager guy who vomits his paycheck every time Chad live streams, but that's an isolated instance. Well, that was a lot of bad about ATF. Let's end things off on a positive note, shall we? ATF 8 has great technology. The rig system allows complete control over every aspect of your character, leading to super creative rigs. It's also being constantly optimized and improved. Animations are clean and modern. Meta and OOC modes are improved from Mirage, and anti-meta tech for skirmishes has been added. From what I hear, the story recently kicked off as well. The map has been added to continually over the past couple of years, slowly but surely adding character to the wasteland. The prop placer has only been expanded upon with new features and new props. On a similar note, players now have access to a plethora of guns and tools. According to a shitpost I've seen, they've apparently even added vehicles. So a lot of the essentials have finally gotten added to the game. For this next segment, I may as well talk about how to have fun in ATF, because so far I've been highlighting the negatives. One may think that I have a chronic hate boner for this game, but that's not true. For those of you having fun playing the game as is, that's great, but let me give those who aren't some advice. Roleplay with existing friends or make new friends through roleplay. Being the loner, while potentially being an interesting character trait in RP, can really only be fun for so long. More importantly though, is have fun with your character, and don't take the game too seriously. Most of the OOC arguers, CRP abusers, meta-ers, MCS patients, basically all the bad people in the community, are those who take the game way too seriously. Design your character to be a little goofy, keep the roleplay lighthearted, and I guarantee you'll start having fun. I visited Mirage once with an old friend long after both of us quit. We were done playing the game in terms of serious roleplay, but we had the idea of creating a pair of milk salesmen who wandered around the ruins of Boulder Cove. It sounds retarded, and it was, but it was honestly the funnest roleplay experience I had in ATF. We approached people in an over-the-top manner, selling somehow refrigerated milk. We didn't attack anyone, even in self-defense, but we wouldn't have had to anyway, because every RPer we came across loved us. We'd also go around purposefully seeking out failed roleplayers to roleplay with. We would follow them around and make them feel special for the day, following orders, going on adventures, doing whatever they wanted to do. Most of the FRPers we played with were actually pretty witty and creative, which is in sharp contrast to the stigma around these types of players. I'd wholeheartedly recommend to everybody to give an FRPer a chance next time one approaches you. Whatever adventure they want to go on, it's probably more creative, fun, and meaningful than whatever hardcore stab run you had planned. Obviously, doing something like that isn't going to advance your fashion career, but I recommend it as a nice break from the seriousness of regular RP, and besides, you'll make an FRPer's day. I think it's telling that the most fun I had on the game was purposefully fail role-playing, but whether it says more about me or the game, that's up to you. So you made it to the end of the video. Thanks for sticking around this long. I understand that this probably contains a lot of hot takes, but I don't care. It's not like I'm still in the community. I'd love to hear what you think about some of the stuff I touched upon, so feel free to leave a comment. That includes you too, Chad. I know I was harsh on you today, but I want to thank you. Your games were a big part of my childhood. I may as well use my remaining time to tell you that I'm a clothing and asset creator. I've been making clothes for over a year and a half now, so you might be interested in checking out my groups. I'm not the best or most advanced, but I have original styles that are more creative than most of the generic wasteland outfits on the market right now. I have 3 groups: Neurowar for ATF stuff, Neurotat for tactical stuff if you're into that, and I also have Neurolol, where I post outfits from video games, movies, and trending memes. I guess I should also mention that my buddy and I have a roleplay game in the works. Truthfully, we're still in the planning phase and haven't started the development yet, but the setting is taking place in post-apocalyptic America during the Second Civil War. If that sounds even a little bit interesting, then I welcome you to join my Discord, Neuroco. The link is in the description and is also in that information thingy on the top right of your screen. Alright, that's all. See ya.